Hey guys, Dr. C here. I am bringing you this lecture from the Gardens by the Bay in Singapore. And today we are going to talk about magic. Okay, so I'm up here in your top right corner like a creeper. And like I said, we'll be looking at magic. So let's start off with some basic definitions. So, magic is the idea of supernatural things occurring that we just can't explain. Magic are supernatural things, things that are extraordinary, unusual, odd, wild, weird. So, superstition is the belief in magic, even when you know the science behind it, even when you know better, even when you know that's probably not going to happen yet. You believe in the magic and you go with it. And that is superstition. I still don't walk under ladders. I still get kind of freaked out when I step on a crack because I might break my mother's back. And it is a well known fact that animal shelters have the hardest time getting rid of black cats. I don't want to say getting rid of, right? Getting adopted. There we go. Black cats get fucked over at the shelters, right? That's what I'm saying. And why? Because people are still superstitious, because black cats are adorable, y'all. Superstition is common. Even though we have modern science, even though we understand the world around us better than we ever have before, a lot of us are still superstitious. So superstition may sound like it's fanciful, but it exists in all sorts of fields and still very, very common today. So an anthropologist named Fraser gave us the conception of magic, right? He sort of gave us our working definitions of magic. He was an anthropologist that worked at the beginning of the 20th century and looked at, well, is all magic the same? And he actually argued that there's lots of different types of magical thinking around the world, but we tend to think of magic in two dominant forms. And so there are two types of magic. The first is imitative magic. This is the idea that like causes like. So if I want to be more like the crocodile, I cut my skin in little nibs to look more like a crocodile, and then I will be imbued with the power of the crocodile. If I want to cause pain to someone else, I make an effigy, I make a little doll that looks like them, and then I stab them in the place that I want them to feel that pain. And therefore, because of imitative magic, if I want to cause them pain in their heart, I stab the voodoo doll in its heart, and that will cause the person pain. Like causes like. The other type of magic, according to Fraser, is contagious magic. So that means if something is magical and you touch it, you will be imbued with that magic as well. So contagious, just like a virus. And you know lots of examples of this. Lucky objects. So contagious magic, it's contagious. If this is a magical lucky thing, it gets passed on to me. If a guy hits a home run and everybody goes and they rub his head. Why? Because they want to get that magic mojo off of him, right? So this is kind of the mojo magic. Now, another definition or term that I want you to be familiar with is the idea of the magician. The magician is somebody who uses magic. So when I asked you guys to define witches, a lot of you guys said a witch is somebody who does magic. And while there are lots of examples of witches who are magicians, not all magicians are witches. In other words, those two words are not synonyms. A magician is a figure that appears in a lot of different cultures. It's one of the major archetypes that we see in a lot of different societies. It's a tarot card. You can see the tarot card example over here on the side. But whether we are talking about Gandalf, Merlin, whether we are talking about fanciful figures from Harry Potter, from Chinese mythology, this idea exists. The person who is in touch with the supernatural, they can use supernatural or magical objects. They can enchant spells. They possess magical traits. These are magicians, and magicians can be good, they can be evil, they can be old, they can be young. It's just a generic term. It's just a general term that can refer to any type of magic user. So what about magical objects, right? So magical people are magicians. Magical objects are fetishes. And right off the bat, you're like, whoa, Chloe, are we getting into something like kind of dirty, hanky-panky, like sexual fetish here? No. And like, this is one of my most annoying like things about anthropology is when an anthropological term is taken out of, in one context, it's not out of context, in one context, and then people go crazy with it. And the colloquial definition becomes the only definition that people know. A fetish is a magical object, an object that appears to have some kind of magical or supernatural ability over others. So yes, If there's a dude that can't get off unless he has a specific object around him, then that special object is a fetish because it has a magical power over him, right? So that's where the whole sexual fetish thing comes in. But that is not the only example of it. Like most religions have objects which are fetishized, which have some kind of ineffable or magical power. Okay, so beyond fetishes, we have magical people, magicians, we have magical objects, those are fetishes. Let's also talk about magical ideas. So magical thinking is when an individual or a group of people assume that natural things are actually caused by some supernatural force. A lot of times, this is not understanding causation, not understanding what actually causes things to occur. And we're going to talk later this semester about witches in other societies, sort of the global perspective on witches. You guys are going to read some Evans Pritchard, and there we are really going to talk about magical thinking. Magical thinking is not a solution to scientific problems. So we've got magic doers, we've got magic objects, we've got magic thinking, and now we need magic words, right? So magical language, y'all should be familiar with this bibbity bobbity boo, hocus pocus, all of the stuff that comes from Harry Potter. Like Harry Potter is a great example of this. The Harry Potter texts are full of all sorts of magical language. So here's an interesting question though. Does magical language actually cause the magic? And like in the Harry Potter fictional universe it does. Or does magical language create a mindset where you can believe in magic? In other words, if we have enough magical language, do we believe that actual metaphysical things are going on? So let me give you a real life example. I was raised Catholic, and in the Catholic Church, there is a point in the Mass where the Catholic priest will actually hold up the bread and the wine, and he'll say, "This is the body of Christ," and he'll say some magical language. And then according to Catholics, a process called transubstantiation occurs where the bread actually turns into the body of Christ and the wine actually turns into the blood of Christ. Catholics are kind of cannibals when they take communion because they're actually eating the body and blood of Christ. Whoa, okay, hold on, that's a different issue. But those magical words actually transform wafer into Jesus. Or is it that the magical language helps the believers sitting in the pew get more in touch with Jesus? And therefore, it's not literally turning the bread into Jesus, but it's metaphorically, in which case magic is actually happening. So that's just something to think about. And you guys read Malinowski last week, this week, at some point, hopefully you're reading it. Malinowski talks about magical language a lot and mythical language, but he says that magical language has a coefficient of weirdness. I fucking love that. I think that's a great way to put it. So magical language is weird, and that's because it's supposed to evoke the weird. So let's talk about a few anthropological approaches to magic really quickly. We've already talked just now about Malinowski. As we talked about with myth, Malinowski says magic is how people understand the universe and how they try to interact with it. Magic is very real to the people who believe in magic, just like myth is. So we can't just dismiss magic as fanciful, because to the people who believe in magic, it is incredibly powerful. Let's take a different approach, the psychological approach to magic. Now, first off, we have Freud. If you aren't familiar with Freud, Freud is a psychologist who came up with a lot of really interesting theories, but a lot of them were also really fucked up because he was kind of racist and kind of classist and like really obsessed with sex in some weird ways, Freud. Anyway, so the psychological approach to magic from Freud, he says that early man simply wasn't rational, so he had to believe in magic because he was just too fucked up to understand the world. Obviously, this is a stupid theory and we're not going to use it. However, I like a different psychological approach, which is Maret. Right? And Maret is a French psychologist who argues that magic symbolically, it allows us to do what we can't really do in real life. Now, if I asked all of you to raise your hands right now, whether or not you ever played a video game, probably a lot of you are going to throw your hands up. And did you ever play a video game in which you built a really ridiculous min-maxed character who could do uber magics so that you could basically run around and just like fireball the shit out of people and destroy everyone? Look at that. We like to perform magic so that we can symbolically do what we can't do in real life. Interesting, huh? So there's maybe a little bit of truth that right there, Merritt. Thank you very much. Let's take the philosophical approach. So again, we talked about the anthropologist Fraser. He gives this sort of philosophical perspective. So does Stanley Tambia. They both argue that magic occurs because We believe we have the ability to shape our universe. And I mean, we make technology. We have conquered large amounts of science. We, whether we like it or not, shape the climate. So man does seem to shape a whole lot of the universe. So magic is just man not quite understanding that. Like, we do shape a lot of things in the universe, but there's a lot of stuff that occurs because of nature. But we're super narcissistic, Fraser and Tambia argue. So we actually think, no, we must control everything. So if something happens and we don't understand it, we must have done something magical. And that's actually what magic is. It's us thinking that we're controlling something that actually we don't control, but we're so narcissistic, we think we control it, we think we impact it, and therefore we're just doing magic. And then I want to do one other approach, and this is kind of a weird one, but I really enjoy it. Game theory, if you've ever taken a social science, you might have heard of game theory, or if you really like sports, you might have heard of game theory, or if you're really into like IR and strategy games, you might be into game theory. So game theory is this idea that like the human experience is actually a game, not literally like somebody's out there playing us, although 2020 would most definitely be like somebody is losing this game right now, but I digress. But that we are all operating as if we live in a game. So think of how often we say take a chance, right? And what we're really saying is, roll the dice. And we talk about, oh, Lady Luck is on my side. We talk about life as if it is game already. And a lot of people kind of min-max or operate in such a way that they're playing a game. Politics is a game and war is a game. And a lot of things that we think of as strategic are really just games being played. From the game theory approach, magic is when you bet against probability and you win. Well, that's sort of what magic is. It's when the universe goes against probability and we're like, holy shit, that really shouldn't have happened, but it did. Whoa. And that's magic. So it's a kind of different approach, but I think there's some merit to thinking about magic in this way. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening in. And I look forward to talking a little bit more about magic in our future lectures.